Alright, it seems like Putin really enjoyed to play that game, so he announced the ceasefire once again, which will happen on 8th of May and will last not 30 hours but 3 days. That's the huge difference. The Russian dictator called about it the day before yesterday, and sorry, correction, the ceasefire according to him should be started from 7th of May. Well, what can I say? Putin again started to play the game in front of Donald Trump, because his last ceasefire wasn't really mentioned by Donald Trump. Nevertheless, it was supported by Ukrainian side, but here I don't think that Ukraine will support this idea, because it is understandable that it's just the game of Putin, a political influence to convince Donald Trump that Russia is ready for peace, but in fact, no. And Zelensky also mentioned that Putin, you are feeding us with a fake ceasefire. We need at least 30 days ceasefire to see that Russia is ready for peace. The Ukrainian side agreed on a 30 days ceasefire almost 2 months ago. And by the way, it was Donald Trump's proposal, and we received the signals from the White House that they're also interested in a lasting peace, not just those temporary ceasefires announced by Putin. But what statements we have from the other Russian officials? Well, they contradict each other. For example, Peskov, who is the spokesman of Putin or Kremlin, told that 30-day ceasefire is not possible under current conditions. So Russia told about it openly, that they're not ready for peace. But they want to play the game. They want to be mentioned, recognized by Donald Trump as some sort of the negotiating side, that they really want to achieve the peace, but it's just the Ukrainian side which is against it. Keith Kellogg, who is not really playing the great role right now in negotiations, but nevertheless he has some of the voice out there, he definitely stated that Russia is playing this strange game and they're not ready for at least 30 days ceasefire. And Lavrov, well, he got really strange. He at first said that Russia is ready for direct negotiations with the Ukraine without any demands, but at the same day he came out with demands from the Russian side, and the demands were basically the same: denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, returning of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk Oblast to Russia, plus Crimea, and officially recognition of that by Western world and Ukraine, which as we understand will never ever happen. And also he told that NATO is the threat for Russia, so there should be negotiations about moving NATO bases out from the Eastern Europe, because they possess the threat for Russia. So no changes since 2022, absolutely no. What Putin had started with this massive full-scale war aggression against Ukraine, he wants to finish only with his own victory, and he's determined in that. And how he could reach that victory using political games involving Donald Trump as a weaponry or by military action in Ukraine, he doesn't really care. He doesn't really care also about the Russian losses, because those are tremendous for Russia nowadays. And yeah, in this video we're also gonna go for the frontlines review, so stay with me. Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's go. Alright, kind of the interesting article from Bloomberg we have. They say that it's the dead end for Ukrainian peace negotiations, so any sort of the side is unable to reach its goal. It basically means that the war will continue. Why is it happening? Why the ceasefire is not possible? Because the crucial thing is the control over the territories of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk. Russia insists for those lands to go to the Russian side as a condition to start negotiations, so not even negotiating about those oblasts and ceasefire first of all. But no, they demand those lands to go to Russia, but Ukraine will never give those lands. And I guess it is understandable even for Donald Trump. They tried to press Zelensky. Zelensky said no, but Davydov did everything to propel this Russian narrative that Ukraine should give up its own territory. And Trump, well, he doesn't really care how this war ends. He just wants to end it. And no matter if Russia occupies Ukraine or not, he simply doesn't give a Well, according to Bloomberg, Davydov during his last forced visit to Moscow, told Putin that it's better to ceasefire at first at the current front line. Putin said no. And also the major demand from Russia is not really occupation of the territories, no. They want to recognize those internationally by the countries around the world as the Russian ones. That's the crucial point for them to even start negotiations. No, it will not work. So yeah, as it was understandable for us from the very beginning, negotiations with Russia at the current stage are not simply possible. physically not possible, because the demands of the Russian side are crazy and unreal. Moreover, Ukraine is not at the edge of being defeated by Russia. Russia is crawling very slowly on the front lines. Mainly their big assault was stopped, and the situation for Ukraine back in spring of 2022 was more critical, way more critical, and still Ukraine defended its territory back then. Yeah, Zelensky called for negotiations back then, but Russia refused to negotiate. There was the big interview of Donald Trump, which he gave to Atlantic. The interview is quite interesting, where Donald Trump said that he's ruling the world, not just the United States of America. Well, anyways, he cannot control even Ukraine. He promised to finish the war in 24 hours, but now we celebrate 100 days of Trump's presidency. And it seems like he understands that he cannot press Ukraine, that it's not just Zelensky, it's about general Ukrainian people resistance. So in this interview, he started to blame Ukrainians. He said that nation will be crushed very soon by Russia. If Ukraine would not negotiate, obviously. So again, Donald Trump is pushing not the right side in those negotiations. First of all, it's Russia, which started the war and hesitates to announce 30 days at least ceasefire. And the other statements of Donald Trump, well, they're classical. He rose up the United States economy, the prices are going down. Americans, do you feel that? So yeah, Donald Trump is delusional and incompetent president, the most incompetent president ever in the United States. I think so. It's my personal opinion. I guess there were also other crazy statements from Donald Trump that he wants to be a pope. And again, he blames Zelensky. I don't really want to mention that bullshit in every of my videos, but you understand the point. The meeting between Zelensky and Trump didn't really change something. At least I don't see it, judging on Trump's rhetorics. Yeah, there was the post created saying that Putin stop or something like that, but other than that, everything is the same. Again, he mentioned that it's Biden's war, not mine, and Ruzzia stated that the United States is going to quit its mediation role between Ukraine and Russia. I guess it will happen like that. And my friends, if you want to support the job that I do almost daily on my YouTube channel, you are very welcome to join me on Patreon. The link for my Patreon page is available right in the video description below. Thank you so much for maintaining my motivation and keep me running on YouTube, and not only. You're just awesome. Thank you guys for your kind support and your help. Alright, according to Zelensky, Russia is preparing this summer one more attack operation towards Ukrainian territory from Belarus. Zelensky mentioned about it in his recent interview. He said that Russia accumulates the forces on the territory of Belarus, but he also mentioned that Russia might potentially create the threat for NATO countries, Baltic countries. For now, the Russian forces are not that close to Ukrainian border, and they're not such strong to start the massive assault, but Russia announced the military drills on territory of Belarus, massive military drills this summer. And just to recall, the full-scale Russian attack happened after the military drills. Also in the territory of Belarus. Putin's idea remains the same: to escalate the war to terror Ukrainians, and not only. That is really Russian regime as it is. And also yesterday we obtained the confirmation that Russia builds up military bases along Finland border. The data was confirmed by the satellite images. Many of the big media sources like Wall Street Journal analyzed it and confirmed. So yeah, Russia is building their bases somewhere here near Finland, and also, as it was confirmed, near Norway. Yeah, Russia has the border with Norway, it is over here. But if we speak about the NATO countries, I think that the main threat goes for the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Why is it so? Well, because Russia has their main military base in Pskov. Also, they concentrated their forces on territory of Belarus. And they also have Kaliningrad region, which is the remote land of the Russian territory. Well, before it wasn't the Russian one, but they've took it, and they also placed their military there. And Russia also has the access to the Baltic Sea, to the Gulf of Finland, and they may deploy many of their ships in this water for the possible blockade of the Baltic countries. Because actually the ground border between all of those Baltic countries with their NATO partners is just this. Just 60 kilometers of Suwalki corridor between Lithuania and Poland. And if Russia goes from Belarus to Kaliningrad, they might cut all of those countries completely. So this is the border with Russia, this is the border with a friendly state to Russia, Belarus, or maybe we may call it Russian Federation already, because Lukashenko follows just Russian interests, and with the blockade of the sea from the Baltic Sea, well, those countries could be in a very bad position. Also, speaking about military production, resources, human resources of the countries, well, the population of those is not more than population of Ukrainian Kiev Oblast with Kiev city. And imagine them fighting against the Russian army, which gained the military experience in Ukraine. I'm speaking about Baltic countries because it's the visible threat from Russia towards them, and from the geographical perspective, from what you see, actually it's the next step of Putin. I would say more, if war ends in Ukraine, Putin will use his army almost 100% on Baltic countries, because he doesn't need all of those armored people back in Russia. And you know what? Donald Trump will not influence that. He would again say that it's Biden's war, something like that, or those countries are guilty, they provoked Russia for attack, like he blames Zelensky, for example, that Ukraine shouldn't be starting this war against a country which is 20 times more than Ukraine. So that nonsense is understandable. And fifth article, guys, please read fifth article. It does not obligate any sort of the NATO country to send their military forces to protect their neighbors or other NATO countries. Actually, the text of the fifth article is pretty much close to Budapest Memorandum, infamously known. NATO members just need to consultate and provide the assistance if necessary. And there are no words about sending military forces somewhere. The assistance could be, okay guy, take care. So actually thinking that fifth article will protect someone, no, it will not. The protection and security guarantees depend just on political will of the nuclear superpowers like United States of America, United Kingdom, and even France. If by the time, for example, of the Russian attack on Baltic countries, those countries will say no, Russia will go forward. And for this reason, I actually think that NATO membership is not the real security guarantee for Ukraine any longer, at least with Donald Trump's administration. And Ukraine, I would say, was really lucky that there was Joe Biden in the White House. Yes, he provided just limited military support of Ukraine, but that support was enormous compared to the other countries, and that helped Ukraine a lot, and still helps because those military packages continue to go to Ukraine, but someday they will stop. And I don't think that Donald Trump will provide more military support for Ukraine. He said that maybe we're gonna push Russia with sanctions, but Russia doesn't afraid of sanctions, no. Only military support of Ukraine actually might stop Russia in Ukraine, not in Baltic countries. So if Russia is successful in Ukraine, they'll absolutely go forward to Baltics. 100%. But I think that after all in Ukraine they will not be successful. From the geographical perspective, it's a very bad country to be occupied by Russia. It is only possible to achieve the military victory over Ukraine by losing millions of soldiers, and Second World War scenario showed that. Since that time there is no major change if we speak about soldiers' losses on the front lines, and sometimes in a modern day war Russia loses even more soldiers per square kilometer, because for example tanks are not just busted by artillery or other tanks, they're pretty much juicy open targets for FPV drones. But again, from the geographical perspective for Ukraine, you see the border with NATO members. And yeah, we may exclude short borders with Slovakia and Hungary because those are pro-Russian states. But the rest here with Poland, with Romania, well, they're pretty much useful for the military support of Ukraine. And that's what they're used for, and Russia just cannot cut those supply connections for Ukrainian army supplies. Plus, Ukraine has its own huge military production. It is being boosted by the funds from the European Union. For example, back in 2022, Ukraine had produced 0 of the 155mm artillery systems, but now around 20 per month, which I would say quite a huge number, and there is lots of the other military production plus drones, so Ukrainian military machine is working and will work even harder. With everything of that being said, I hope you agree with me that it is very important to support Ukrainian military, because otherwise Russia could escalate to the Baltic countries, to Poland, and we know what might happen in this case, a big war in Europe. And yeah, unfortunately guys, I don't see any sort of the signs that Russia is willing to stop the war in Ukraine. They escalate day by day. And yeah, Belarus dictator in his last meeting said that there are lots of the Nazis in Ukraine and in Baltic states. and they put memorials for Nazis elsewhere massively on their territories. So in a way he prepares his society, his people, to join this war against Nazism. And guys, about the frontlines updates for today, we have the Russian army movement in Pokrov's direction. So they moved towards Uspenivka even more. It was yesterday, it is today. As you saw, they moved in this area right to the village, almost fully occupying it. And also the gray area is now being extended to Nova Alexandrivka, the next village on the way to this road, and there are small villages. So the aim for Russia here is to reach the border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and Ukraine has already announced the evacuation of some of the villages near to the front lines on territory of Dnipropetrovsk region. Yeah, before Ukraine attacked from Dachna, but now Russia wants to regain the initiative. And also they moved a little towards Kotlarivka, occupying a couple of the fields out there. So yesterday and today, as we see, Russia is very close. The terrain here is very flat, so they might actually go to the border with Dnipropetrovsk region if they occupy Kotlarivka fully and cross this river. And also if we go a little to the south here, Russia moved with two of the assault vectors. You may see them over here, not far away from Ruzzia village. They go to Bahatyr village, which is quite big and has this road for the supplies. So for Russia it could be interesting from the tactical perspective, but again there is some sort of river, and the assault in this sector is not that easy for them as to go to Kotlarivka, for example. But other than that, there were no any advancements of the Russian army. Before, the Russian army was way more effective compared to what we witness today. And yeah, for the last 24 hours, Ukraine haven't performed the counterattacks on the front lines. However, Ukraine keeps defending its territory, I would say quite successfully, judging on the size and the resources of the Russian army. And yeah, soon is gonna be the Victory Day in Russia military parades. You may see parents going with their children in those tanks for the war against Nazis, and Nazis are everyone but not Russians. So yeah, that madness happens almost every year. For us, for Ukrainians, it is not the celebration because we lost millions of people during the war, and it's just one more day to remember this heavy loss, which happened because of Stalin and Hitler, communists and Nazis. We just hate those two ideologies, and you know, after all, Soviet Union used the Second World War to occupy the vast part of Europe. But for Russia, it's the great propaganda celebration, and they would waste millions of more army men, and not only army men, to occupy neighboring states once again and to restore their empire. That's the goal of Putin, which Trump and other guys like Trump simply do not understand. Alright guys, and now please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so you help me a lot, and as usual I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.